Can't you say something?
This is, can you hear me? Is the mic on?
I have germs.
Okay, it's not coming in through the room here as far as I can tell. But if you can hear me up there, then we're okay on YouTube.
Hi, Steve. It's okay to shoot down in his room.
All right. We good?
I don't think we're live.
Okay.
I'm not tapping the mic.
No.
I hear you. You want me to do it?
No. Very good. So good evening, everyone. This is the planning board meeting for Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. I'm Doug Breskin, the chair of the planning board. To my left, we have Vaughn Dugan, Roger Murray. To my right, we have Steve Webster, who's the vice chair, Nancy Wiley, Paul O'Brien, and Julie Jacobs.
We made it.
Very good. The first item on the agenda of our work session is the demolition review ordinance. I'm sorry, yes, thank you, Roger. Julie, would you sit as the alternate for the meeting tonight?
Sure.
Thank you.
Do I need my name or no?
We know you will.
Where is her name?
All right. Again, the first item is the demolition review ordinance. Vaughn, would you like to introduce this?
Sure. The Heritage Commission,
You're going to have to yell.
I
having trouble hearing.
I don't have a, didn't you hear me? Hello? Hello? Okay. I'll try and project. The Heritage Commission became alerted of certain developments in town that were upsetting not only to the Heritage Commission, but also to the public. Properties, were historic properties, which are over 50 years old, were being demolished. And there was no notice given to the neighborhood, the neighbors, and I think in short order, some building permit was issued and construction started. So that was sort of the genesis of our discussions. But the demolition review has been discussed by the planning board repeatedly over the years, but we haven't made any progress. But the thought is that now may be the time so that people have time to digest what's going on. If nothing else, this is not an ordinance, and I'll let the authors speak, that would necessarily stop anything, but it would give cause for consideration to not only the town, but the neighbors. So there's a window, even if it was deemed historically brilliant, it still could come down. But there would be a vetting period, first with the commission, the demolition review board, and then the public. So I'll let the authors speak, though, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. So let's open this for public comment. And if somebody would like to speak, please come up to the podium. Which I see is backwards. Is that on?
No, yeah.
Switch on there. Can you make sure that's on?
Dave, tap it just to drive him crazy.
Done?
We need him.
We're good?
We're good? Yeah. Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want me to read the ordinance, if you want me to just do an introduction as to what the contents of the ordinance are.
I think if you proceed as you think see fit, however you'd like.
Well, I just think it would be important that the public know what's in the ordinance. So maybe I'll start off by just reading the ordinance. It's 3 pages, so it's not real long.
The proposed ordinance.
Okay. So the Heritage Commission proposes that the town adopt a historic demolition review ordinance. Properties subject to the process would be those built 50 years or more before the date of the application for demolition, that are more than 500 square feet in size, and that are visible from a public right-of-way, trail, or waterway. The ordinance would allow the creation of a demolition review committee to carry out the assessment. The intent of such an ordinance would be to allow time for the committee to evaluate the historic significance of any properties slated for demolition, and if deemed significant, provide an opportunity to work with the property owners to explore options other than the demolition of the structure. The review process would take no more than 60 calendar days, and the property owner would ultimately be allowed to move forward with the proposed demolition of the property if discussions do not lead to an acceptable alternative. The ordinance itself reads 20.1 Historic Demolition Review, and the definitions are: as used in the ordinance, the following words or phrases shall have the meaning set forth below, except when the context in which they are used requires a different meaning. A. Building. Any structure designed or intended for the support, enclosure, shelter, or protection of persons, domestic animals, chattel, or property. For purposes of determining exterior measurements or footprints in order to locate the setback line, buildings shall include all attached structures such as open or closed porches, carports, garages, balconies, stairways, and other similar structures. B. The Demolition Review Committee is a committee of Wolfeboro Heritage Commission composed of 3 members of the commission and 2 other Wolfeboro residents appointed by the chair of the commission. Any conflict of interest by a committee member shall be resolved as set forth in NHRSA 673.14. C. Demolition, the act of pulling down, destroying, removing, or razing a building, or commencing the work of total or substantial destruction with the intent of completing the same. For the purpose of this section, demolition does not include the removal, replacement, or installation of roofing, siding, or windows, interior demolition, or routine maintenance, as long as the maintenance undertaken does not fit the definition of demolition contained in the same section. D. Written notice communication is via print or email transmission. 20.1.2 Buildings covered by the ordinance. Any building or part of a building in the town of Wolfeboro which falls under the terms of this ordinance when A. The proposed demolition is greater than 500 square feet of gross floor area, and B. The building is determined to have been constructed more than 50 years before the date of application for the demolition permit, and C. The building is visible from an adjacent public right-of-way, public land, trails, or waterway, or is listed or is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places or state or local historic registers. 20.1.3 Factors to consider in determining historic significance. The Demolition Review Committee shall consider the following criteria in its deliberation. The building or structure is of such interest or quality that it would meet national, state, or local criteria for designation as a historic, cultural, or architectural landmark. B. The building or structure is of such unusual or uncommon design or material that it could not be reproduced or could be reproduced only with great difficulty and expense. C. The building or structure is of such architectural or historical interest that removing would be to the detriment of the public interest. D. Retention of the building or structure would help preserve and protect the historic place or area of historic interest in the town. In the event of a change of property ownership or expiration of a demolition permit, a new review would be required. 20.1.4 Code Enforcement Officer Assessment and Notification. When an application for demolition permit, a building permit involving demolition, or a site plan review involving demolition is made, or a formal written application is submitted to the code enforcement officer for a determination under this ordinance, a 60 calendar countdown begins. At this point, the code enforcement officer shall determine if the building or section of the building is covered by the ordinance as outlined in section 20.1.2. If it does, the code enforcement officer shall, within 5 business days, forward a copy of the application to the Demolition Review Committee, notify the applicant in writing that, as required by the Historic Demolition Ordinance, the demolition request must be reviewed before the demolition permit can be issued. 20.1.5, Demolition Review Committee initial assessment. The Demolition Review Committee shall meet within 10 business days of receipt of the application and make one of the following determinations. If it determines that the building is not potentially significant, such as section 20.1.6 for criteria, the Demolition Review Committee shall, within 3 business days of making the determination, notify the code enforcement officer in writing of that determination. In such case, a demolition permit may be issued by the code enforcement officer, provided all other requirements applicable to the demolition have been met. B, if it determines that the building is potentially significant, the Demolition Review Committee shall notify the code enforcement officer in writing of its determination to begin the review process and ask the code enforcement officer to notify the applicant. 20.1.6, Demolition Review Committee procedure. Having determined that the building is potentially significant during the maximum 60 calendar day period, the Demolition Review Committee shall, A, schedule and hold a meeting with the applicant or the applicant's representative to explore alternatives to demolition of the property. B, conduct such public hearings or investigations as it may deem necessary to inform its final recommendation regarding the granting of a demolition permit. C, facilitate public comment by announcing that the property is in the demolition review process. This could take the form of, but not necessarily restricted to, posting public notices or placing signs in the public way near the property. If no alternative to demolition have been identified and agreed to by the applicant after this review process has been completed, the Demolition Review Committee has issued its recommendation, or the Demolition Review Committee has failed to act within the prescribed 60-day review period, the code enforcement officer shall be free to issue a permit if all other application requirements have been met. Prior to demolition, if the applicant agrees, the Demolition Review Committee shall photographically document the building. The committee shall also encourage the applicant to salvage and reuse significant architectural features. Nothing in this article shall be construed as preventing immediate demolition if public safety is at stake and the building has been determined by code enforcement officer to be a public hazard and demolition is the only viable recourse. So that is a year's worth of work on the part of the Heritage Commission. We researched half a dozen towns in New Hampshire which already have this similar ordinance in place. Just for your interest, some of the towns that are currently working with such an ordinance are Concord, Keene, Portsmouth, Rye, Stratham, and Ware. Again, the ordinance does not forbid an owner from doing what they want to with their process, with their property. We're just asking that they follow a certain process before that happens. It's initially the Heritage Commission was approached by several people in the last year when certain things started happening, such as the building on the corner of North Main and Libby Street was demolished, and another property put in its place that a lot of people feel was out of character and had wished that other alternatives could have been sought before such action happened. If the demolition involves something that, like a garage that's in failure but has no significant bearing on the culture or the heritage of the town, then it really becomes a matter of 10 days after the application, the owner will have, we will have done the process so that the owner would get a release or a permit from the code enforcement officer to proceed with the demolition. So it's just sensitive pieces of property that we feel we would like to put some brakes on, to have conversations with the owner, have the public aware of what's going on so that we can try and give people alternatives to just an outright demolition. Other members of the commission are here tonight, and if they want to add to what I've just said, I'd love them to come up and share their thoughts, or we can answer questions from you.
Thank you. Does anybody on the board here have questions?
Well, so I just to make two comments. One of them regarding definitions. We originally started with a definition of building that was more conducive to interpretation through this ordinance. But at my insistence, we adopted the exact same language, which is already in our definitions, so that there wouldn't be a conflict, even though it reads kind of strangely. It's already there. The other thing is, when Dave was saying 21, 22, it's XX is really whatever number we assign it, you know, if it becomes an ordinance.
Yeah, the two X's are placeholders.
That's right.
Roman numeral 20.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Julie?
Since I don't know what the
Julie,
usual,
could you pull your mic down?
is it working yet?
No.
It's working for you two.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that. So since I don't and have never pulled a permit for demolition, I don't know the process. What is the process? Since we never see any of these.
Well,
Anybody
there's
know?
There's two ways that I'm aware of. A person can ask for there's such a thing as a demolition permit, just a standalone permit. If you have something you want to tear down, you can't just tear it down. You need to apply to have that done. And so that's one way that it happens. And the other way that it would happen is if a building permit came in for a new structure that included the demolition of an existing structure, that would need to be noted in the application and addressed by the code enforcement officer.
Yes, but I mean internally at the office, how does it happen? Is just an application online, you just fill it out and then you bring it in and say, I want to rip down my garage? That's all that happens.
No, actually.
And then where does this piece of paper application go?
So the applicant will also have to prove that there are no hazardous materials that need to be removed and mitigated. You know, that's really the primary purpose at the
Part of
moment.
the application, right?
Yeah. Asbestos or.
Yes, but it's part of the application.
Yes, you'd have to present that it's been reviewed by a specialist.
They actually have to submit it oh my God. They have to submit a raise permit in addition to, as part of that raise permit, they have to submit a report for asbestos. And if there is asbestos, then they have to submit an abate report.
So is a raise permit the same thing as a demolition?
Yes.
Okay. And so, okay, here I come, I've got my paperwork, I've got my money. Where does this piece of paper go next? Who
It goes to the
authorizes
building
this?
It goes to the building department for review. You have to have that asbestos testing done, and then the building inspector reviews the application and the asbestos testing and the hazardous material testing. They also have to,
Insurance.
what?
So it's the code office, that gets this?
Yes, it's the building department, the code office, yes.
You have to have insurance as well.
Okay. So at what point does the 60 days start?
The
When they
way the
hand-
language reads, it starts when the application is received by the building inspector. Who? Why?
Asbestos stuff. They had to do the insurance thing, the other thing that you just said that they had to do. And now they turn in my paperwork with the money, and now they're like, oh, wait a minute, you got to wait another 60 days and somebody else has to look at it.
So the process is an issue with any permitting, and if we have a department that is staffed and, you know, a person who has a checklist, when you come in to pick up an application, you would get information about what you have to provide. And one of them would be hazardous materials. You would also, at the same time you got that information and told you what to do with that, you would get this. So the 60 days starts even hopefully before you do any testing. You would know that we're planning to tear this down. And so it wouldn't necessarily be an additional 60 days. It could run concurrently.
Most projects, you would start with a building permit before you did anything, even asbestos abatement. You want to know that what you were doing was in agreement with town ordinance. So I would hope that a good project manager or an owner would know that they should start getting clearance from the building department before they do anything.
I had a question.
Sure.
So I'm new to the committee, so forgive me if I didn't know. When was the Heritage Commission formed, roughly? A couple of years ago?
2016.
Okay. And there's 3 people. So again, when
there's
they...
more than-
No,
Three.
no,
There's
it's
more than
not
three.
3 people.
We're seven full-time members.
Okay. I don't
And
know
a
where I
couple
got
of
3.
and
Okay.
two
Three
alternates.
three members of the commission would sit on this board. There would also be other members of the public. The
Okay.
Demolition Review Committee.
And you are a
Okay.
member.
I am a member, but
All right.
I am
She's a
representing the
representative.
planning board. Yeah.
Excellent. Great to hear that we have a Heritage Commission. So when somebody does put in an application and they say, I want to tear down, say, North Main and Libby,
Yep.
when do you get eyes on that? And then what do you do? Do you drive
Well,
by
the-
and say,
the way-
oh, we're flagging it, we want to get
The
involved?
way the ordinance reads, the application would, the request for the permit comes in and is accepted by the town building inspector. Within 3 days, he needs to notify the commission that
Okay.
there's such a document, such an application has been brought to the office, and then we have 10 days to hear the demolition and render a decision as to whether is of no consequence and it can go forward, or it needs to go through the review process.
Thank you.
Am I getting that all right, guys? Okay.
Decision.
But when we get to the very, very, very end,
Yep,
this homeowner can do what he wants, right?
correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Although it's not necessarily a home.
Yeah,
Anybody.
yeah.
I mean, they can proceed with demolishing the building. We have there's no teeth in this ordinance that requires an owner to do anything other than what he wants to do, or what we can convince him to do.
So I have a couple of questions as well. In section XX.1.2, buildings covered by the ordinance, item B, it says if the building is determined to have been constructed more than 50 years before the date of application,
Yes.
how is the age of the building determined?
Tax records typically will tell you that, or assessor's records usually will tell you that.
All right, thank you.
Oh, I'm being told I'm wrong.
They're not terribly accurate in some circumstances. Mine's wrong.
Maggie, please.
This is really odd. There are a couple of ways.
If you could identify yourself.
Sorry, Maggie Steer, past chair of the Heritage Commission and still member. We're going to look at whether or not it's visible from a public way. We're going to look at the architectural style and the level of integrity, any significance that the building has, and be as accurate as we can on the 50-year cutoff. There are some buildings that we would determine are really significant to the history of the town, and the Citizens Bank building would be one of those, although I think it was built the old Citizens Bank building, I think that was built in the 60s, so it would be that 50-year cutoff now, but I'm just giving you an example of buildings. So it's not always easy to tell for the more recent buildings, but for the older buildings, it's pretty easy. So whether it was built in 1778 or 1780 doesn't matter to us. It's still more than 50 years old, and it's visible from a public way. So we'll take a look at the history of it and the evolution of any changes to it, and that information will inform our discussions with the owner and what the plans are.
So I expect then if it's likely that it's close to the 50-year cutoff, then it's also likely that it will be recorded in the town records as to when it was built.
That's a good assumption, Doug. Yeah.
And then my next question, comment and question. On the next item C, it says if it's eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places or state or local historic registers. And I'm wondering what the qualifications are for something to be listed in a local register.
Right. So that's handled by the State Office of the Division of Historical Resources, also the State Historic Preservation Office. And we don't have buildings listed to the state register right now, but the first step in identifying what might be eligible for the register was that townwide survey that we did 2 years ago. So anything that is named or illustrated in there, I think there's a pretty high likelihood that it would be determined eligible. What has to happen is a form needs to be filled out that documents the history and the appearance of the building, any alterations, and then that's shared with the office in Concord. And that could take a little bit of time. So one of the things the Heritage Commission hopes to work on, and I think we will be, is identifying buildings that are really significant that might be at risk so we can start that paperwork and that application process on a proactive basis.
All right, so thank you. And so I understand the state register. What, if any, local registers are there? Because I'm not aware of them.
There aren't any local registers, but no, we have had a determination of eligibility for both South Main Street and North Main Street through various work that the Department of Transportation has done. And that will identify buildings that are contributing features to a potential historic district and those that are not.
Thank you. And then my last comment is in that same item, it says the building is visible from an adjacent public right-of-way, public lands, trails, waterways, or is listed or eligible as we just discussed. And I would suggest some change to the punctuation so that after public right-of-way, you would insert a semicolon rather than a comma. And after waterways, include a semicolon rather than a comma, which would allow you to group public lands, trails, and waterways together so that somebody would not be able to argue that trails should be standalone, separate from public lands.
Makes sense.
So
So
our intent, I'm sorry, Vaughn, go ahead.
as a point of process, the Heritage Commission considered bringing this to town as a warrant article, but it was deemed by certain people in the town or suggested that we, the Heritage Commission, bring it to the planning board to present it so the planning board could guide it through, and that could include, recommended changes. I mean, I think the intent is that it becomes our document, and then we present it to the town for warrant articles.
Okay.
Not warrant articles, for articles to be considered at vote.
Chairman,
Paul?
thank you. So I understand from the comment this is voluntary on the part of the applicant, is that correct?
It is voluntary, yes.
So the applicant could theoretically say, I choose not to participate in this process, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Well, wait, no, they have to go through the process.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They can choose not to meet with us. But they still need to follow the process. I'm sorry.
Not sure how that works.
Yeah, Paul, I would say from what I'm reading that the beginning of the process is for the planning department to notify the historic commission that this is an issue. And then it's, I would assume, up to the historic commission to reach out to the applicant, and the applicant could refuse to cooperate.
Correct. Is that correct?
Well, this is really an interaction between the Heritage Commission and the building official, code enforcement officer.
Is there anything that the Heritage Commission is suggesting in this proposed ordinance that would stop, curtail, slow down the ability of an applicant to get a building permit?
They could certainly continue the process of getting all the other approvals.
Okay.
There's not like they don't need to satisfy this requirement before they go ahead and get their site survey.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
I'm just asking, in this process that has been described, if an applicant says, I choose not to participate, could this commission and its committee affect, cause to slow down, stop, delay a building permit?
Hypothetically, it would delay it because you still, if the commission, if it was determined that it's a structure that we feel has significance, we would still be required.
If you all thought that there was a historic significance to the structure, you could say, slow down, wait.
The building inspector would not be allowed to issue the demolition permit, and we would,
Allowed, okay?
But that would only be for 60 days, right?
for 60 days.
Okay. And I read something in here that if it is determined that the building is potentially significant, where did I read it? There's a final recommendation that comes from this demolition review committee. If the final recommendation says we recommend against it, does that recommendation have regulatory teeth?
No,
No.
no.
Okay, so if I can conclude, the Demolition Review Committee could intervene, slow down the process, but when all is said and done, an applicant could say, I'm going for it no matter what.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that,
The
that kind of
intent-
harkens
the
back
intent-
to your comment about this has no teeth.
Well, it has no teeth in that after the 60-day process has terminated, then even if our recommendation would be, this is a very significant town asset, we recommend that it not be torn down. Let's say we were to say that.
So there'd be a
Then the
public-
owner would say, oh, fine, I'll thank you for your opinion.
There would be a public outpouring to say, slow, stop, mitigate this process. Okay, I got it.
Go ahead.
I got it.
Hi, I'm Ginger Hankins.
Hi, Ginger.
I'm Ginger Hankins. Doesn't go that low. And I feel like, part of the Heritage Commission's mission is to educate and advocate to the public.
If you could turn the mic to you. Thank you.
There you go.
It's very directional, so stop pointing at your mouth. It's not going to pick you up.
So a big part of our role as the Heritage Commission is to educate and advocate for our heritage. And instead of going down the road of enforcement, I'm an optimist. And my goal would be that we would meet with homeowners and say, this is a historic property. And look,
It's not you.
point out the features to them and help them see the value of that property. Hoping, again, I'm enough of an optimist to hope that that will make a difference. Give them some resources. Maggie has some good resources with the Preservation Alliance of New Hampshire. Try to find some resources that they could use. Let them see the options besides tearing it down.
Yeah, I will follow up
Could I
too.
follow up with a question on that? So that sounds right. Is the Heritage Commission contemplating building an inventory of those buildings that meet the criteria of the 50 years so that you can get ahead of the process? Or is it kind of, you wait for the episode to occur and then you say you know what I mean?
Fortunately, the taxpayers did pay for a townwide survey, and we have the results of that.
So you have a list of all the 50-plus years? Perfect. Sounds great.
I had a
Where
comment
is it?
to make.
But where
Yeah.
is it? I don't think anybody's seen it. Where is
It's
it?
on the town website. It's at the library. We can get you a copy if you want.
So it's on the website, Heritage Commission?
I'm looking at it.
Tab?
I can't find it.
Yeah. I had a comment and question. I'm just thinking, as a realtor, if someone buys a house and they don't know ahead of time, they're going to expect that they can do whatever they want.
Correct.
Coming from Hingham, Mass., we have a strong historical, and we lived in a house that was in the historic district, and you could not do anything.
Correct.
So I would say, too, what Paul just said, identify them. And I haven't been here that long, so this is probably a hot political topic, but have we ever talked about doing that?
So Nancy, I'm glad you brought that up because
Okay.
there is a difference in New Hampshire between a historic district and a Historic District Commission, which is a regulatory body that administers changes to buildings within the historic district. We are not that. We are a Heritage Commission, which is not a regulatory body.
Correct.
So we have no authority to tell people what they can or cannot do with their buildings, and we have not drawn a line around certain properties to say, these have to stay exactly the way they are.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just thinking of the optimist comment, and being in the business, I'm thinking it's going to be a fight. If someone buys something and they come before you and you say you can't do it,
We're not
there's
going to
no
say
law.
you can't do it.
Well, we don't recommend it.
We don't even say that. We say there's a process. There is a process. There is a demolition review ordinance. If you plan to tear this building down, we want you to know that there is a process that takes 60 days. It runs concurrent with the other permits that you will need to get and the other approvals you will need to get in town. But it won't stop at demolition.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
And as a Realtor, I think, I know Realtors get nervous about things like this. We want to try to make it as easy as possible for homeowners and for the sellers so that it doesn't stop any deal. It just makes people aware when they want to buy in the town of Wolfeboro that we care about our historic assets deeply and we want to maintain the character of the town. And I'm guessing that's why people want to buy in this town.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's the point that I think we need to make. We all benefit from maintaining the character of the town.
Paul, you had a comment?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Maggie. That's great. So the reason I asked the question about the inventory is I'm on the website. I can't find it, so I may not be looking in the right place. It would be great maybe if we put it in a more obvious.
We just found it.
I think I found it.
Okay.
I think it's the 2024 Townwide Historic Resources.
That it? Okay. My bad.
It's long, yes.
How to use this
Not a
survey.
really good name.
And then, but Maggie, I'm just reacting to the point that was made here, is there is language in here that talks about final recommendations regarding the granting of a permit. And the final recommendation could be, we recommend against it or we recommend for it. So although you've maybe assuaged the concern of a Realtor, when I see words final recommendations regarding the granting of a permit, that suggests to me that there is some regulatory oversight going on here. And you may want to just fix the language or deal with the language, because my first reaction to that was exactly what you've helped me understand. You're not a regulatory body. It feels like a regulatory initiative. If it's not, call it out. That would be my advice. And thank you for pointing out where the inventory was. It wouldn't be a bad idea that people knew, hey, your property, whether it's commercial or residential, prospectively is historic in nature.
I didn't know the study was finished, actually. My turn? I have a small problem with the last page on page 3 here. In the process, the procedure, scheduling a meeting, great. Conducting hearings and investigations within the planning and zoning department type thing. But then I can also see this is where people have been talking about these properties. They weren't happy with having things done, that all of a sudden now we're going to advertise that we're going to have open discussions, signage and political stuff happening. I can see this happening in the 60 days of a lot of yelling and screaming going on against someone trying to do a project with a lot of bad blood.
Well, a lot
Just
of this
because
is
these people look at their property all the time and say, you can't do that.
Hi, I'm Andrea Dudley. I'm a member of the Heritage Commission, and this may or may not address exactly what you're asking, Julie, but we didn't create this in a vacuum. We didn't sit back and say, what can we do as a Heritage Commission to, promulgate procedures or whatever. We were reacting to very real comments from residents of the town of Wolfeboro who have noticed things happening. Like I think Dave referenced, it's very hard to hear in the audience, or it was at the beginning, the property at the intersection of North Main and Libby. There are other properties in town that have come down, and residents have approached us, and they've probably approached you as well, and said, how come we didn't know about this? Is there no process in town that gives residents an opportunity to weigh in when we maybe feel we're losing a very significant part of our history? So that's really where this started, and this was the better part of a year's work to look at, well, what have other communities done to deal with this? How has it worked for them? We spent a long time talking with people in other communities that have historic demolition review ordinances. We spent a long time talking with the prior codes enforcement officer in Wolfeboro about what would work and what would not work, and he had bought into these schedules. Now we know, that's a different animal now, but we would envision having those discussions further. But I think it's just important to understand we didn't just decide we wanted to do this for something to do. People in town have a very real concern about what happens and how can they be notified and how can they have an opportunity for input. And I think to the point of regulation, we may recommend or ask the owner, could you not tear it down? Or we may say to the owner, could you leave the facade of this piece of it? Or we may say to the owner, could you salvage this piece of it and put it at the Clark Museum complex if it's that important? There are more things than just yes, no, tear it down. It's a real opportunity for a discussion to maybe have a different outcome. And if in the end it didn't, then we all agree that that's what happens, and at least the residents of Wolfeboro would know that we had a discussion and it was an open process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doug, I had a question. Page 2, under 1.3, item E, you've got, in the event of a change of property ownership, this is going to start all over again. I'm a builder, and I'm working on a project that the land or the property will not be sold until all permits are in place. So technically, I'd get a permit, I'd sell the property, and then have to go get another permit. So I kind of have an issue with that piece of it. The other thing, as a builder, why 60 days? Why can't you do it in 30?
Well, there's a process. I mean, there's 3 days for the building inspector to notify us, and then we have 10 days to act on it. So that's 13 days. And then on a more complicated, then we have to arrange for a meeting with the owner, and that takes a certain amount of scheduling time. And it opens the opportunity to have a public hearing if it's a big deal. So all those things take scheduling times, and notification sometimes is an issue. If you're having a public discussion or meeting about this, usually there's a 7-day notice that needs to be instituted before you have the meeting. So we've tried to streamline it as tight as we could, and still allow the process to proceed the way it's supposed to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I live in about an 1810 house, and I love old houses, so I hate to see them torn down. But I do have some questions on what authority would the town adopt this? Is it going to be part of the zoning ordinance? Is it a standalone ordinance? What authorizes the town to adopt an ordinance like this?
It would be part of the ordinance, our zoning ordinance. I believe that's our intention, just like all these other towns that have them. It's not a novel idea. There's a list on the back if you want to look who else has them, and I'm sure you can look them up.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure, Roger, I understand your question. What authorizes the town to do this? Was that your question?
Yep.
So could you help me just explain?
The town can only do what the state authorizes it to do under New Hampshire law. So if the state hasn't authorized you by statute to do something, you can't do it, basically.
So, but if I could, I think I heard them mention that, and I think you might have forgot about Laconia. Laconia, Concord, Portsmouth et al. Have somehow done this. So are you suggesting we might want to find out if there's precedence that they did that? Or
Well, this is the first time I've seen one of these, so I'm just trying to find out, what gave us the authority to adopt it.
Yeah.
That seemed like a logical first question.
yeah.
It does, and I'm ashamed that I don't have the answer for you, Roger, but I know where to find it, and we can talk to those other towns. I'm sorry I didn't bring more information with me tonight, but we'll get that for you.
But I think
and
the
that's a
answer
valid
Roger's looking
question.
for is there's some RSA,
Right.
someplace that is enabling legislation that says you can go ahead and do that.
Yep.
And then if it were adopted, if we're part of the zoning ordinance, then you'd have to have a required public hearing, and then it would go on the town warrant.
Yeah, yeah.
But the town can adopt other ordinances in other ways.
Right, if it's part of a building code ordinance, that's something completely different, right?
Yeah, or selectmen can adopt ordinances, or the planning board. If this is going through the planning department, then the planning board may be the logical. And under the statute, the Heritage Commission is advisory to, among other entities, the planning board.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll get that information to you.
Okay, and then, this is minor, but under 1.5A, I think that should be 1.3 instead of 1.6.
Right. 1.2 criteria.
Give me the reference again, please.
It says, not potentially significant, see section XX 1.6, and I think it should be 1.3,
Okay.
which has the criteria.
Again, our intention is to hand this document to you guys, have you dissect it, make it acceptable to you. And so we could make the correction, or you could do it in your review process.
And my last comment is that I believe that the Demolition Review Committee would be subject to the New Hampshire right to know law. Your meetings would have to be open to the public. There would need to be notice. And if you're going to have public hearing, they would have to be scheduled. And there's slightly different requirements for the planning board to hold a site review subdivision hearing than there are for some other hearings in terms of the notice required.
Yep, I think that's true. Mr. Chairman, question? And Roger, since you know ordinances probably better than I do, is the ordinances that we deal with at the select board are, you got to follow them or their consequence. It's, if you don't, then there's something else. This appears to be a voluntary writing. Can you make an ordinance a voluntary writing?
Well, I don't think this is voluntary. It says if you want to tear something down, this is the process you need to go through, but we can't stop you from doing it. We can say, please don't, or could you do this, or could you do something slightly different? But you still have to go through the process, and it needs to be completed within 60 days, if I understand it correctly.
Right.
I think, though, to Paul's point, in the event that somebody fails to follow the process, what is the recourse that the historic commissioner of the town has?
Well,
I think it would depend on.
Technically, a building permit is being held until they follow the process.
A demolition permit is being held, a raise permit is being held. Not a building permit, but a raise permit, yeah.
So there is a regulatory issue here. That's my point, is if somebody, to Roger's point, if somebody were to say, I understand what you want to do, but very frankly, I just need to proceed for whatever reason, for the reason that Steve brought up or other, but we say, stop, you can't get a demolition permit. That's a regulatory issue, right? Or did I misunderstand?
But you can't get it for 60 days, but if I decide I want to tear down my 18 1910 house, which everybody's decided is just critical to the atmosphere of the town of Wolfeboro, I can say, I want to tear it down. I don't care what you tell me.
I'm doing it.
And you can, I'm going to tear it down, and there's nothing you can do about it.
You have to go through that 60-day process and all the steps in that process, but at the end of 60 days, your raise permit cannot be withheld.
So there is a regulatory effect of
Right,
this
which is
ordinance.
why the Heritage Commission is not administering this process. A separate committee is, comprised of members of the Planning Board and some from the Heritage Commission, and some from the public.
I think there were 2 public.
2 and 3 Heritage Commission people. So you've picked up 3 Heritage Commission people, 2 others, and then someone is supervising that activity? Who is going to do
Being
that?
chair for the committee. No, I'm sorry, I meant the committee that would be reviewing the application in this case would chair that.
Well, typically it's the planning department, I believe.
The Board of Selectmen Planning Department?
Excuse me?
The planning, the planner, is that what you're saying? The
Yes.
planner?
Yes.
And is there going to be an appropriation to run this, do you think? I like that, that was good. That was good.
Other than some
Student body right.
Some administrative work maybe that.
Is there going to be some kind of money that we need to set aside to do
The
that?
code enforcement officer needs to provide notice, that's just a phone call or an email. The meetings, the public notices, if it chose to be advertised, maybe we would need a little bit of funding for that.
Okay.
Incidentals, but I wouldn't.
But it basically puts a 60-day stop on the code officer's work. He's like, oh, gotta wait.
Well, so does hazardous material. It's similar to that. I mean, if you give him let's say her, we'll give her, the builder,
Them.
the application for the raised permit, and she'll see that she has to prove that there's no asbestos.
Yeah.
And also, it will have to be reviewed. So we're going to notice this committee to have them start the review period right then. And then while they're waiting for their asbestos people to mitigate or review, this will
But
be
wouldn't-
ongoing.
Wouldn't all the asbestos stuff be done before your permit is,
Not
application
if-
is handed in? Yeah.
Goes in with the application. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So they've already been waiting.
Yeah.
Okay, it's May, I'm putting in the applications, now I gotta wait till September?
Yep.
And I have to go to the planning board?
There's no need to go to the planning board.
Something's- No, I'm talking about the next steps, I'm thinking of like, I'm trying to do this to my house.
Well, part of the waiting is if you buy a property with asbestos, is
So it's
you bought a
statute.
property with asbestos, so now you get a deal, and that takes time.
Yeah.
That's a statute.
No
You
big-
got to deal with that, right? Mitigation of hazardous materials is a statutory issue. I'll tell you what I'm stuck with. I'm stuck with the notion that it's voluntary. Your words, no teeth. But there's a 60-day pause that an applicant has to deal with. I'm just having trouble squaring that.
Can I piggyback on that? Because I think we're talking about the same thing. What I'm foreseeing is that, someone buys a property, maybe the realtor told them, look at this, you want to demolish it, you might have to wait 60 days because that realtor is informed with what we're talking about. Awesome. Maybe not, though. So the person buys the property, and then they say, okay, I want to, raise my property, I have to wait 60 days. Why do I have to wait 60 days if at the end they say, you can get your permit anyway, but we don't want you to tear it down?
Right.
I'm just foreseeing a fight.
Except for
right?
the code officer now has to hold it on his desk for 60 days.
Yes, and then the buyer says, why do I have to wait 60 days? Time's money, and I'm just going to do it anyway. I'm not going to listen to them, which is why we've probably talked about this before I came on the board, but maybe the next step should be to take those properties and say, you buy this, you can't tear it down. because we've already decided.
Well, you can't tear it down without going through the process.
No, you can't tear it down because we're calling it historic or whatever. Did someone say, I think she left, at a New Hampshire, you can't do that?
It's this not the intention here.
Okay.
It's not, you can't tear it down, ever. It's just, we have to review it. And within 10 days, it will be decided by the committee whether or not it has any importance at all. If it has no importance, you know, the code enforcement officer will give them the raise permit.
Anybody who's buying real estate with the intention of doing something to what's there should be doing due diligence and making sure that what they are proposing to do is allowed and what obstacles there might be in the way. I
Absolutely.
mean, I never had a client come to me who wanted to do something who didn't get that speech out of me. If I didn't give it to him, I probably should have been sued for malpractice.
So we're happy to receive input from the planning board, and if you have suggestions, we could rework it. But we're hoping for your endorsement.
Another thing to consider was when the property on North Main Street was torn down, because of the resulting reaction. I was thinking hoopla, but I didn't say it. Reaction. There was a stop order, so this may prevent some additional uproar because there's a process to go through and the public gets noticed and it's been reviewed by a committee. It's just not outrage.
Yeah, but I can just see also that it could cause a lot more of protests, signage, people picketing, you know, because of, oh, now they have time. Where the stop order was brought basically from a neighbor that was not notified properly. But aren't neighbors in a demolition type situation usually notified anyway? Like in any other thing?
No.
They're not? They're just like, bang, done?
It's just, no, you can get a building permit and a raised permit without notifying your neighbor.
I'm probably way out in front of my skis, but I believe the stop order had nothing to do with the historic structure, but rather citing setbacks, use of the sidewalk, and items that, you know, were irrespective, is that a right word? Had no bearing on whether it was a historic structure or not. But I understand your point. And Roger, I understand your point, which is, you know, it's important to let people know what they're getting into, caveat emptor, right? I'm still stuck. I'm just still stuck on and I like the notion here of, let's just take that inventory list and say, we think preliminarily, if you're thinking about changing control, ownership, or whatever, or doing anything with these structures, maybe you write them a letter or something, just understand we want to take a look at it, if in fact this ordinance finds the light of day and gets passed. Because then people will be forewarned and they can do what they think is appropriate. Up to and including saying, I choose not to participate, I'll just kind of wait the 60 days and off I go. So I'm still stuck with that.
Well, and let's not get caught in the weeds here. I think we all agree that we value the heritage that is Wolfeboro. Mm-hmm. That's why my husband and I moved here a couple years ago. And this builder of the North Main Street property is a perfect example, this developer. He has built several houses in Wolfeboro that look exactly the same. He hasn't done that in Boston. He does most of his renovation in Boston on Beacon Hill. And if you go to his social media, guess what he does there? He doesn't do tear downs because he's not allowed to.
Well, I don't think anybody would want to tear anything down on Beacon Hill.
I wouldn't have wanted the house on North Main Street torn down.
But we're not in the business, I don't think, planning board doesn't do a design review of residential properties.
Well, I just
Do
think
we?
that we should send a message that Wolfeboro values our heritage. And maybe developers can think twice and give the buyer, the owner, some options to save it. Even if it meant salvaging that beautiful granite in the wall there.
Yeah.
Salvaging some of the granite in the foundation, the fireplace, the mantelpieces. Give them some resources and some options.
I got it. I appreciate that. I'm just still stuck on the 60-day. You can do whatever you want, but wait 60 days. It's a pause. That's all.
Right, I think maybe, I'm getting the sense that we've maybe overstayed our welcome a bit. And I think what I've heard is some very concrete suggestions around, we may have some numbers wrong, we may have punctuated things that mislead people, we can fix that. I think I'm hearing that maybe 60 days is too long. We could certainly look at, could we shorten the process? Is 45 days the right amount? I don't think 30 days is enough, but could we make it shorter? I think we will certainly take all your feedback, and we'll welcome feedback after tonight if you have more things you'd like to add. But I think our hope is that we would go down the road and continue to pursue this and tee it up for approval when we find the right venue, Roger. Is it in addition to the zoning bylaws? Where do we go with it? But we really want to get it in front of the town so that we send a clear message to residents that the town does value its historic resources. And we think, as the Heritage Commission, we were the right place to tee that up. We're not a regulatory body. We're not proposing that at all.
Good.
But we would like to partner with the building department, the planning department, the codes officer, and make this a reality to demonstrate to people that it matters and will throw what you do with your property. If it's in the public way, if it meets all the criteria. If you're back on a back road in a mountain, then we're not as concerned about that. So I guess, I don't know, Dave, if you had something more, but I would say we've really welcomed the input. You had some great comments, and we'd like to get you unstuck, particularly
Thanks.
Paul.
Thank you.
But, thank you.
I would suggest you look at your procedure and how, in light of the right to know law, and also in kind of streamline it or make it a little more concrete so there are definite steps that would be involved.
I have one more comment. I chair the Technical Review Committee, and I'm wondering if that would be involved. That gives an opportunity ahead of time for a developer, homeowner, whoever, to come before Technical Review Committee. And you get, the fire chief and electric department and all those guys are at the table. And it gives the applicant it's kind of a bite at the apple, if so to speak, to say, I'd go there or I wouldn't go there, you know what I mean? Just to get a feel for it.
Although my understanding is that the Technical Review Committee only meets with regard to site plan review, which wouldn't be necessary for a raise permit.
So
Hopefully,
you could expand their remit, right? You could suggest an expansion of their remit to get involved in that.
Yeah.
You could do that. Could I ask Roger a question? You said something about the right to know laws in the procedure. Again, my apologies for catching up. What are you meaning by that?
91A.
Now, I understand 91A, but
This would be subject to 91A. This is a committee. It is a public body and therefore has to follow the requirements of that statute.
which is public notices and meetings and that. So I think, did I hear you that maybe you're saying that 60 days or whatever you have, you may have to shoehorn, you may have a problem because of 91A requirements and noticing public meetings? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying there'd be a notice requirement. I'm saying a notice problem. I'm saying that you would need to follow the requirements of the
right to know.
statute, which would not necessarily take
I got it.
60 days.
I got it. Thank you.
Leanne, did you have a comment?
Yes, it's just in regards to the 60-day. I just wanted to make a comment, and feel free to contact our interim building inspector, Peter Rowell. But the New Hampshire State Building Code allows a building inspector or code enforcement officer 30 days to review residential permits. Right. And if they don't, it allows them 30 days to review and approve or deny an application, which includes a raise permit, demolition. In our town, we have a raise permit in addition to a building permit. If everything checks the boxes and there are no issues and the fire department and the well, the fire chief and all the other department heads, and including codes, signs off, they can issue that permit in 30 days. If there are issues and they issue an email or a letter, then that 30-day clock starts again. But the initial 30-day clock starts when we stamp date that application. So if all the boxes are checked, this 60 days does delay. It puts an an additional burden or
Well, it's
unnecessary.
in conflict with, and I don't know whether it's a state statute, but it's in conflict with potentially a state statute that says you can, is it an RSA?
No, it's a state building code.
So it's a state building code, so it's in conflict prospectively with a state building code, so somehow we got to,
Yeah, and as
Yeah.
far as like the meeting requirements for public notice,
yeah.
you wouldn't be holding a public hearing, you'd be holding a public meeting, which only requires a 24-hour notice. As long as you put a notice in 2 public places, 24 hours before the meeting, you meet state, statute. So that's pretty quick turnaround.
Okay, that's interesting.
I guess, rather than trying to answer the question specifically, I will say that a lot of what's in our proposed ordinance it mirrors what's already been adopted by other towns in New Hampshire. So I've got to presume that they've had some.
I wouldn't presume,
Well,
I wouldn't.
we can look at it.
We can assume, huh?
I mean, if you want some examples of that, you can look at the short-term rental regulations around the state
Okay.
and how they've fared.
Well, I think we've heard what your concerns are.
Thank you.
I guess we'd like the opportunity to go back and try and
Thank you.
put your mind at ease about what your concerns are and see if it's, unless you have some other thoughts.
No, I don't think that there are any other further comments from the board here. I think
Well, I
we
guess-
want to go back and see what, if any, changes you'd like to make. And
Would it be on a line to ask, just to basically poll the planning board? I mean, is this something you're attracted to? Or is
certainly,
it,
you're welcome to poll, sure. If anybody would like to voice their opinion, certainly not obligated to, but they are welcome to volunteer.
there's just a lot of work in this, and
Yeah.
we're more than happy to put in more work. But it would be helpful to figure out where the
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying that while I support the intent here, my main concern, as we've discussed now, is any potential delay or additional burden that would place on the applicant. If it's going to delay their plans by 30 days or whatever the number turns out to be, that could be a problem for some people. And I don't know how to resolve that. Anybody else?
60 days is a problem for me.
Ditto.
60 days is a problem.
What wouldn't be a problem, in your opinion? 45?
Within the permit review period.
30 days?
You get the phone call, you look at it, 3-day notice, 10 days to look at it, wasting half a month in that first part of it. Application comes in, look at it quickly.
I like the part about you're going to share it with the neighbors, because very often neighbors don't know. But having public meetings and having a big to-do about some of these things is not really in anybody's best interest.
Well,
You
public,
don't want to hide it, the neighborhood should know, but putting it on the front newspaper, everybody picketing, that's not a good thing.
I think it's premature to offer an opinion. I would need some more information. I certainly am in favor of seeing the town not lose its important historic buildings. Which is probably one of the reasons why I was on the Friends of the Wolfeboro Town Hall.
So my opinion is that if we have a good process in place and people come into town and want to do something, they'll sit down with somebody in the building department and go through a checklist of the things that are required of that particular property. And this would hit the checklist. So the day you buy or the day you think that you might do something and you're reviewing the necessities, you would know right away, so that process could be commenced. So I think and actually I think our potential planner is a checklist person, and I think that would help quite a bit.
Could we add in to the checklist to address some of the issues that the potential, person who wants to raise the building would have to inform neighbors within a certain area? Why don't we do that? That way, any fight that's going to erupt, it's going to erupt within the 30 days. People are going to be informed.
Yeah, the concern there is that now you're putting an additional burden on the applicant.
Correct.
I think they should be burdened with it, to be honest. I do, but that's just my opinion.
And this only applies to properties that the stretched out 60 days that are deemed important.
Correct.
It's not stopping everything.
Correct.
It's slowing down a little bit potentially important historical town resources. So,
But that's not saying that if the process is condensed and smooshed enough, that it couldn't apply to other things, so that the neighbors of somebody up on that mountain road would actually know that, oh, they're taking down the barn, instead of driving by one day and it's missing. You know what I mean?
so you're in favor of the idea?
I'm in favor of neighbors knowing what's going on next door and not finding out on Facebook that somebody took off to Pennsylvania, which just happened on my street. It's, some of that sharing is nice amongst your neighbors. It's not a bad thing, so I could see that maybe,
I agree, it's nice to know what's going on in your neighborhood, but I don't think it's our place to regulate.
But it's not a place to regulate it, but it could be the type of thing that you come in for a raised permit, okay, you have to, with all your, immediate neighbors, have to send that letter.
But we're talking about just, 143 properties you identified? Something in
Just
that
the
range?
old ones, yeah.
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 This is a terrible thing to suggest. You've given us input that says there are people who have approached you and said that we've had some concerns and issues about historic properties being raised. Okay. Have you asked any of those 143 what they think about if you said we're putting you on a list? That if you want to sell your property or do anything, you have to go through this 60-day process. You would be subjected to that. I hate to use the word subjected. Don't misunderstand the word. But you would be a candidate for a pause if you were to do something. Have you considered asking them? Because you might want to do that because they have as much input into this process as others do. So that would be, something that I'm not asking you to do it. It's just something you want to think about. And then the larger thing would be, if you didn't think about that, it would be kind, I think, if you're proceeding here to say we should let them know that they're on the list. You're on the list. Just let them know. That would be something to consider. And I'm not going to dodge behind Roger, but I read this too tonight, and I was, and thank you, Maggie, for disabusing me of this. I was hearing regulation, and I quickly went to the Heritage Commission's charter, and it says not a regulatory body, but it still feels to me a little regulatory-ish. That's that 60-day thing. So those are my three ideas: either get them all in a room, bring them all in. We did that a few years ago with hotel owners, and somebody wanted to build a new hotel in town, and we said, well, let's get the people who have existing hotels to come into town, tell us all about what they think. So, we got some really quality input from them. Or at a minimum, if this thing were to, generate some momentum, let those people know that they're candidates for this, whatever we want to call it, a review or a pause or something like that. That would be my advice to think about.
I agree, and just to piggyback on this, I feel like I'm just hammering away here with my point, but maybe we could also, because I've had some people, I'm still newer to town, but people say, hey, so if someone wanted to come in and buy one of the buildings right here and tear it down, they could. And I was like, wow, that's a problem. 'Cause I don't want that to happen. It sounds like we don't, that's the point here. That's what we're talking about. So maybe to piggyback off of Paul's idea, transparency, big buzzword, right? Let them know, but also, do you want to voluntarily slap a label so that, you know, when you sell, the buyer can't tear down that building?
Well, they can, they're just going to go through a 60-day period.
But then every building in town could be torn down. That's what I'm trying to prevent here, right? That's why we're here. So maybe we get them together and say, hey, look it, this passed, let's assume this all passes, 60 days, 45 days, whatever. It passes. The next step, get everybody together. Hey, we did this thing. Do you have any questions? And would you like to be named as, you can't tear this down?
That's a whole different thing. That's, yeah, we don't have that. We're not, the Heritage Commission is not suggesting that.
I'm not even saying Heritage Foundation does it, but that could be something to prevent these buildings from being torn down in 15 years, maybe.
The more onerous tool would be to create a local historic district. And that's what you're talking about. And that's what I referenced when I said both South Main Street and North Main Street have already been determined eligible as a historic district. We don't want to go there.
We don't, okay.
You've already done
Not
that.
at this time.
Okay.
But we do want to not bend over backwards in favor of individual property owners when the character of Wolfeboro is threatened. And so we really want to have this timeout process to, and it's not just when a property is changing hands. It has to do with development as well as individual property owners. And I don't know how long you've owned your house, Julie, but you could say, you know what, this house is too big for me. I don't want to live here anymore. I want a smaller house.
According to my children.
Okay, whatever. And that's a perfect example of a chance to talk to a property owner. I'm not talking about somebody who's new to town. If they're new to town and they're looking at a property, they would be smart to go to the planning office and find out what's the process. Well before the 60 days starts, well before they own the building. So I don't think this is going to be as onerous as you imagine it might be on individual property buyers. I think longtime property owners, and Roger is a perfect example, love their old houses and want to do the right thing by their old houses and maybe would appreciate some guidance. So that's the other thing that we are offering.
All right, well, I think there's been
Enough.
a lot of good input here.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else from the public that would like to speak?
I wasn't going to say anything.
Could you identify yourself, please?
My name is Ann Blodgett, and Doug, your mic is not working.
Thank you.
That was the main reason I was going to come up, and then I got really jazzed up because 60 days, think of the things people have to do if they're going to build a house. I mean, back up. Let's not get hung up on 60 days. People have to, go to the DES. They have to, get shoreland permits, all those things. 60 days. I mean, I'd ask Nancy, that's a drop in the bucket.
I don't think it's a lot, but he's the builder and he's gonna get him.
So who are we representing here? So we have a town where the master plan says we value and want to protect our assets for the future. Okay, so why are we bending over backwards for somebody who comes in who doesn't even live here, and we're worried about holding them up for an additional 30 days? Isn't planning about being thoughtful? I mean, I agree with what Vaughn said. It also may keep you out of some sticky wickets legally to have that additional 30 days. That might have helped with 71 North Main, don't know. And to have I agree with Julie, to not have the abutters note, imagine. I don't think that's happened to any of us, but the house next door to you gets torn down and your life is hell. It happened to me in Massachusetts. your life is hell.
I just got new neighbors without knowing.
Well, it has to be 50 years old or your life is hell anyway.
Yeah, but, so, I mean, especially in the tight downtown corridor. And let's remember, the gateways, you know, I believe the master plan says those are important gateways to Wolfeboro, why people want to come and move here. They don't want to come here and just to tear things down. So if somebody's going to come and tear things down, their intent is, and they're in a hurry, their intent is different than our master plan. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we'll close the public hearing for the demolition raising permit and move on to the next item, which is the Planning Board Rules of Procedure adoption. You've all seen in your packet, I believe, the Planning Board Rules of Procedure as well as the Capital Improvement Committee Rules of Procedure.
I make a motion we adopt the Planning Board Rules of Procedure as presented.
I'll second that. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Let's vote. All in favor of Roger's motion?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
All abstains? No other? All right, very good. Next item is new business, the conditional use permit short-term rental application fee. The select board public hearing to adopt the fee schedule is scheduled for June 4th. And you'll see that there is a copy of the memo to the select board that was used previously and forthcoming for the official hearing. And then there's some comments included in your packet from Audrey Klein. And I'm hoping everybody's had a chance to review all of that material. So does anybody have any comment on the memo dated April 30th to the select board?
I think it presents the information very succinctly and well.
All right, and I'll thank Leanne for helping put that together. And then the comments from Audrey Klein. You can see her comments in red included in the minutes from the BOS meeting, the select board meeting, rather.
Just and this, I don't know what this is. What is
Oh, could you bring your mic
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know this, and I should be asking Audrey, but she's not here. But does somebody here know what a room facilitator is? It's on the second page. It says, what about room facilitators?
Oh, I think she's referring to the agencies in town that,
That have somebody's name on the window and you...
a realtor that
I got
offers
it.
rooms
Okay.
for rent.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that's what she's referring to, but
got
I
it.
don't know for sure.
Okay. Okay.
And I guess you could also lump something like VRBO or Airbnb into that same bucket.
I did, if I could, on your first point that you made, and by the way, you did a great job at the select board, and I appreciate it. I was there, and it was awesome.
Thank you.
Her first note on the application and then the organization, she kind of poked at the organization, and I think that's probably something that, you know, I will take back to my board and say, you know, we got to figure out what we want to accomplish and then organize around doing that. This notion of department heads and assistants, and I think that doesn't tell me what we want to get done. We want to organize around what we want to get done and then figure out how many of thems and these and that's we need. But other than that, I was pretty okay with this. She did point out that there are some issues I think that we're going to hear at public hearing about ADA compliance. As you can see, a colleague is pretty vociferous about that. And Roger, I think you helped us last time by saying you can be grand-personed in even if you may be non-conforming from a safety point of view. Is that what you you shared with us last time.
Well, you are grandfathered from the application from this ordinance if you can demonstrate by any reasonable method that you have been a short-term rental prior to the date in December when the first public hearing of this, on this ordinance was posted. And the only issue before the Board of Selectmen are the fees. Everything else has absolutely nothing to do with your hearing.
Correct.
It's, the ordinance has been adopted. We're having a hearing, I believe, on June 3rd. And the question is, are there going to be fees imposed for the permit or are there not? This ordinance does not remove any other legal requirement. It does provide certain things, and the ordinance itself says that someone from the fire department and the code officer has to go and inspect before a permit is issued, and then there has to be re-inspection in 2 years. This is by conditional use permit. It does not relieve any applicant from having to comply with any other ordinance, statute, whatever. And basically, there was a lot of discussion about the grandfathering issue, and that's because RSA 674-19 says that a zoning ordinance cannot apply or prevent a formally existing, legally existing use that is then not permitted under a zoning change. So if you're doing something, say you have a house with a 30-foot setback, with a 20-foot setback, and the ordinance changes and it has to be a 30-foot setback, doesn't affect you in the slightest. You don't have to tear 10 feet off the front of your house. And the same applies to a use. And, the ADA thing, you're not relieved of any requirement to comply with that. We just specified certain things and it would be subject to an inspection in order to get the permit. And we felt they were safety issues. They were similar to what is in other short-term rental ordinances that we looked at. And, we're not trying to list every single thing you have to do. And one of the changes we actually made was at the suggestion of, I think it was the code officer, it may have been both the code officer and the fire chief, and we changed the word on inspections from where we had the inspection by the Wolfeboro Fire and Rescue Department and by the code enforcement officer, which shall include, and before that, we said these were what the inspections were going to be, but they wanted to change it to include so that when they were in there doing their inspection, they found some code violation, they could act upon it. And so we made that change. So it doesn't prevent anyone from requiring compliance with any other code.
Thank you.
The other, I'd also like to add that one of Audrey Klein's comments is that if the pre-existing short-term rental did not have the meals and rooms tax registration, that they were not legally operating. And while it may be true that they were not legally operating, the meals and tax is separate from zoning, and I believe that our purview is restricted to the zoning portion of it. Therefore, if they were operating without the meals and tax, I don't think that would disqualify them from our perspective of being a pre-existing use. I think we probably need to get a legal opinion on that, but that's my guess.
And not only that, but that wasn't the only requirement that they could use to prove that they've been accepting guests for a long time.
No, I understand, and so certainly there are a number of ways for them to show that they had a previous rental history. I believe that Audrey's aim here is to show that even if they have that rental history, but they don't have meals and rooms registration, then they are disqualified from having a fully compliant pre-existing use. Any other comments?
So does this in any way get people who didn't pay rooms and meals tax to be required to in the
I
future?
think that's up to the state, not up to us. Going through this may raise the profile of people who are doing that and make them a target, but it's certainly not something that we're going to try to do.
I think that would be very difficult.
So, I guess we're happy to move forward with this as it is.
One thing on that, under section E, the property owner shall submit proof of a current New Hampshire room and meals tax license identification number. And I believe actually part of the purpose of that was so that we had some documentation that they were in fact renting rooms, not that we were trying to collect money for the state.
And that's for the new application.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. For not a new application, but any new short-term rental.
Right, application for license.
All right, believe that
We don't.
next item on the agenda is comments submitted to the planning board. Oh, that's what we just went through, so both of those were included under the new business. The next item is public comment. I don't see anybody rushing to do that. Next item is consideration of minutes from the May 6th meeting.
Okay. Line 77 on page 2. The end of that line, I think he said the existing septic on the 3-acre lot meets DES requirements, not exceeds the requirements.
Meets versus exceeds?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then on line 82, I'm hoping Steve can help me. But it says at the TR meeting where a preliminary was also waived.
Where a preliminary is something.
That's correct. Who's waived?
What preliminary what?
Oh, preliminary review.
Mike?
A preliminary consultation review with the planning board.
Okay, and then on starting with line 231, oh no, 229, green has no E multiple times, for, as in Green Street. And then on line 331, it's Steve Patriquin, which is Patriquin. And on 334, it should be 674:19, not hyphen 19.
Shut up.
And I think that's all I've got.
And I have one, line 138. Von Dugan did not confirm. She asked what tools were used.
Yeah.
Probably questions instead of confirmed.
Questions asked, yeah.
Ask what tools or questions.
Either one of those will do.
What else did we have here? Anything good? About it.
I'll make a motion, we approve the minutes with those corrections.
Second?
Seconded, Paul second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any
Abstain.
opposed?
Abstain.
Julie abstains. All right. Thank you. Next item is communication, CIP rules of procedure, which we mentioned previously. I don't know that there's anything, do we need to do anything with that, Leanne?
No, they're just finalized. Just for
Okay.
your-
Oh, they're done.
So they're there for your reference. And then the ZBA notice of decision,
Just for your information.
again, just for your information. And I think that's it, unless anybody has anything else they'd like to bring up.
Move to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.